And good evening to our fellow listeners and followers. Tonight is Sunday, February 11th. I know you guys are all busy watching Super Bowl, but take a free time to listen to our podcast show tonight. It is 8:23 p.m. I am Federico Lyons of States Rights Radio and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. And tonight's episode, we'll be doing two segments. Impeachment amateur theatrics show and Trumpism versus Federalism. And we'll start with the impeachment. And that's been impeachment has been in the air for, quite frankly, 12 years. I mean, the Democrats were constantly trying to impeach Trump. The Republicans are trying to impeach Biden and Mayorkas and a bunch of other officials. And one of the things that really bothers me, and I think it bothers you as well, is that all of this is just a circus. It's theatrics. It's all politically motivated. And the reality is, to me, is that there are legitimate reasons for, I believe, Biden to be impeached. I believe there were legitimate reasons for Trump to be impeached. I think there's legitimate reasons for every president in my lifetime to have been impeached. But instead, it's all the tribal warfare and the, political games. And that's why none of these will ultimately be successful. But we look at Article 2, Section 4, that's the impeachment clause in the Constitution. It says the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. And the question is, when should we impeach a president? Like I said, I think every president in my lifetime has committed impeachable offenses. I think certainly most presidents in the last century have committed impeachable offenses. Yet all we either get no impeachments or we get these stage shows where they're impeaching people for political games. And I guess the question is, when should we impeach a president?
Just to make a little parentheses, right now Cody Holt of All In on America will not be joining us, so it's just me and Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. But to answer to Seth's question, it is up to Congress to set the definitions of high crimes and misdemeanors. But yet again, we've seen in our lifetime, the definition of these high crimes and misdemeanors are petty crimes that are really not worth the taxpayer expense on that. We can look at the Clinton impeachment debacle, the Bush, certain parts of the Bush administration, Obama administration, Trump and Biden, where they've, set to waste taxpayer money on the definition of high crimes and misdemeanors, where there is not that sufficient high crimes and misdemeanors. As Seth pointed out, there's a lot of, definitions that need to be defined. For example, before the show, Seth and I were talking that, Bill Clinton decided to bomb certain parts of the Middle East to cover up his Monica Lewinsky investigation. That alone is a clear definition of high crimes and misdemeanors because it violates the War Powers Clause. President does not really have the authority to do that. Congress gives him the authority. I would say that the Nixon impeachment goes a little bit with a better understanding of the congressional definition of high crimes and misdemeanors. I think Nixon wanted to exert executive privilege on these White House tapes, and again, it is a legitimate reason to exert executive privilege. But when you're trying to do a cover-up, there you are in deep water there. So I think that one was clearly well defined by Congress. With the impeachment of Mayorkas, which failed the House, Just because Mayorkas doesn't want to enforce whatever, laziness to enforce the federal border protection for the border with Mexico. Quite honestly, it's not the role of the federal government to enforce any aspect of immigration, as I said, in the previous segment. So I think that it's just a political statement of Republicans. The same thing with Reagan, and just to sidetrack, because of during the Nixon Watergate situation, you had a special prosecutor assigned to that case, assigned by the Department of Justice, which later, after that debacle, Congress passed the Independent Counsel Act. I forgot the name of the other name of it, but which established Ethics in Government Act, which established the Independent Counsel. And yet, that made it more of a debacle because, then you had Kenneth Starr and all that, which again, it loses the principality of a Republican form of government. And it kind of, just loses the sight of it. And that's the reason also the political amateur theatrics show that we are seeing in D.C., where I'm glad in 1999 Congress decided not to continue with that law, and it's back to special prosecutors. Because again, just because the president appoints the attorney general doesn't mean that he works for the president. He works for the people, for the Constitution, not for a bureaucrat in the White House. So yet again, it's all this dog and pony show, but in the end, we have been set aside how do you define a crime and misdemeanors by Congress? How well can you define that? Is it, perjury? Is that really a high crimes misdemeanor? Is it covering up, cover-up? Or bombing without the consent of Congress? So it's clearly what do you find? What do you clearly define high crimes and misdemeanors?
Yeah, I think one of the most important reasons to impeach a president would be if they commit war crimes. They bomb people without congressional approval. I think that's absolutely a reason to impeach somebody, and that's as we've got these impeachment inquiries going on, therefore Joe Biden held classified documents after he was vice president. They're going after, which the parallels to Trump, accused and he took classified documents, and it just kind of exposes the hypocrisy on both sides right there. But in contrast, Thomas Massey, a congressman from Kentucky, recently basically gave a warning to Joe Biden because in 2007, Joe Biden put George W. Bush on notice that he would impeach George W. Bush if he took us to war with Iran without congressional approval. And Thomas Massey tweeted, consider this your notice, because right now Joe Biden has been engaged in weeks-long bombing campaigns in Iran. And it looks like, they're really itching to get a war started with Iran, which has been a neocon dream for decades, without congressional approval. Now, I would agree with Massey. Massey has the right reason to impeach Joe Biden, but the Republicans, they're going to ignore Massey because the Republicans love war too. And so the Republicans don't have a problem with war crimes being committed by presidents because, both Democrat and Republican presidents have been committing war crimes for decades and decades. So, that's the reason to impeach Joe Biden if he officially draws us into a war without congressional approval. which I would argue that he already has. And we've been at perpetual war for a long time, and people just don't realize it. They just know the wars that the media sells to us, like Russia, Ukraine, but they don't talk about, the Yemen war that we've been funding for since Obama. Obama started a campaign of bombing in Yemen that gets basically no media attention, and that continued under Trump, and it's continuing under Biden. Where we're slaughtering, I think, over 100,000 Yemenis. The vast majority, women and children, have been killed by U.S. bombs, and nobody seems to care about that. This is the reason to impeach presidents. Like, go back to Bill Clinton. I remember a Ron Paul press conference where he was asked if he would support the impeachment efforts of Bill Clinton, and he said, well, I will support them, but not for the reasons the Republicans are laying out here. It was all the political games. It was all the cover-up of Monica Lewinsky. That's the only reason the Republicans were going after him. But Ron Paul made the point, he's bombing people in the Middle East. He's bombing innocent wedding parties and aspirin factories in the Middle East. That's far more serious than covering up infidelity in the White House. This is something that will have vast negative blowback on America. And then we, of course, have 9/11 not long after Bill Clinton's presidency. I mean, we've got to start focusing on the real issues and stop the political games. It's hard to. Do I think Biden should be impeached? Yeah, I think he's an awful president. I think he has done things that are impeachable, but it's so transparent that this is political games from the Republicans that it'll never happen. I mean, and it's the same thing with Trump and the Democrats impeaching Trump. I mean, I think Trump's locking us down and calling us non-essential was impeachable, but the Democrats would never impeach him for that. No, they played their political games, and it's just we've got to start standing up for our liberty and start holding politicians accountable. And the political games are just making things worse, and it's pushing us towards civil war, and people are actually cheering on civil war. Civil war is not what we want. We want to do whatever it takes to stop a civil war from happening, but all this political gamesmanship is drawing us closer to that.
I got a question. Do you recall Trump ever violating any war powers clause and bombing, or did Trump was not acting very aggressively during his period as president?
Oh, I think there's a lot of dishonesty among the MAGA side on Trump never started a new war. Well, Trump never ended any of the wars that started before him. Like I said, he kept bombing Yemen just like Obama started. Remember the mother of all bombs, where he was really, really giddy that he got to bomb people with the mother of all bombs. So I think Trump kept the aggressive war stance, and maybe he didn't start a new one, but he kept the old ones going.
That's true. Yeah, he never pulled out of Afghanistan or even Iraq, so we still have troops, and I know that Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, and I haven't heard a peep out of Afghanistan. I mean, I don't know what's going on there. So, I mean, the thing is that when we have troops all over the world, why do we still have troops in certain bases in Germany? Why do we have troops in South Korea or Japan? I mean, China is not going to invade anybody. China is busy trying to be a capitalist, trying to, set the world in capitalism, even though they're communists, granted. but they're more capitalist than we are. I mean, I don't know if, so, and with the basis on impeachment on a war powers charge, yeah, you're right. I mean, Biden has it, Trump has it. He continued the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. He didn't pull out of those areas. That alone is impeachable because Congress gives a resolution right after a bombing that's not approved from Congress. I said this a long time. I said this in a segment before, months before, that when Jefferson went to ask Congress. Congress did not approve a declaration of war against the Barbary pirates. Congress gave him permission to guard American commercial vessels. So, with that, Jefferson took it like an approval from Congress, and he went and he fought the Barbary pirates and protected American vessels to protect commerce. So, there again shows the true meaning of the War Powers Clause. But then it came in 1973 where Congress has given the authority to the president to bomb wherever, and then Congress will decide, oh, you know what, yeah, sure, we'll keeping you funding, we'll give you more money. That's what led to the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Well, that was before, but the Gulf of Tonkin resolution was the first blank check that Congress gave the presidency. So there's a million, that to me is a definition of high crimes and misdemeanors that Congress failed to implement because Congress is playing a game. Congress doesn't want to do it. The courts never ruled on the Vietnam War because it's Congress to rule on the war. It's Congress to say, no, that's a legitimate war. It's not the courts to say it. The courts, gives it to Congress to define it. So the courts never really ruled on any war aspect for the Vietnam or the Korean War or the wars now. So in the bottom line, my main conclusion is that these high crime. Oh, sorry, no. My last thing is that in 1866. This is where they play the amateur theatrics. The Republican Party plays the amateur theatrics here, and Democrats too. But here's where they really play the amateur theatrics. Andrew Johnson got rid of Secretary of War Edwin Stanton because he was trying to suppress he's trying to initiate a harsh Reconstruction era, martial law all around. Again, you had the black codes, you had black people being suppressed. I understand that. But the way that Stanton was doing it was a little bit extreme. So Andrew Johnson let him go. He asked for his resignation and he left. And Congress impeached him for that. I mean, that alone is a pure amateur theatric show that shouldn't have happened. Presidents can ask for members of his cabinet to resign and leave or ask for his or demand their dismissal. And, there should be no there's no repercussions by the legislature or by the courts on that. And that is a amateur theater. That was the first amateur theatrical show of Congress, punishing even though he was a Democrat, but he was served in the Republican administration. But it was a very stupid show from the Republicans in Congress. And again, they define that high crimes and misdemeanor a very petty one. So I say, clearly ask yourself, how would you define this high crimes and misdemeanors? How would you, what constitutes that to be a high crime? I mean, if that's a high crime, really, is stealing a candy bar from a 7-Eleven, is that also considered a high crime and misdemeanor? So it's, Congress really needs to step up the game and clearly have better definitions on what is a high crime. And that's, my conclusion is, Congress has to have a better definition to it, not just something picked out of random.
Yeah, and, it's just... How does it have an effect on America? I mean, again, the Bill Clinton, his infidelity, which obviously, I'm opposed to that, morally speaking, and but who was he victimizing by his infidelity? Well, his wife, and that's it. Not the American people. That's not a crime against the American people. It's a crime against his wife, and it's but bombing people in the Middle East and creating anger and contempt for America abroad, that has an effect on us. That creates terrorists. That creates people who want to kill American people because our president was bombing people indiscriminately just because he wanted to get headlines changed. I mean, that's absolutely a high crime and misdemeanor that Bill Clinton should have been impeached for. And the Republicans, they didn't care one bit. Outside of Ron Paul, the Republican Party did not care one bit about that because the Republicans are as bloodthirsty as the Democrats. They love war, and it really kind of sickens me because, war is a very war is the health of the state, and it does no good for us to be engaged in immoral, unconstitutional wars that were not declared by Congress. It creates more enemies for us. It costs more money. And it destroys our liberty. When we're at war, the government thinks that it has every right to take away all our liberties here at home, and that's what affects us as people, the people who fund this government. We get affected by these immoral wars. And, infidelity in the White House, that's between Bill Clinton and his wife. And, it's such a obvious example of how we are engaged in this stupid tribal political warfare while there's nobody serious trying to actually rein in the government and, protect our liberties. And it really comes from an attitude of the American people who are, like I've said time and time again, we are such a tribalist society. I mean, we need to go after Joe Biden because Joe Biden's causing all our problems. Well, you know what? I mean, Joe Biden's an awful president. Donald Trump was an awful president. But we need to start standing up for our own liberty and demanding accountability, true accountability from the politicians and the government in general, and not play these stupid political games.
Yeah, and just on that note, you mentioned that it affects our liberties and trying to suppress our liberties, a.k.a. the Patriot Act, a.k.a. Executive Order 90666. It really does have an effect on us. So that, to me, would be a clear definition of a high crime misdemeanor. And I hope that Congress does define it for the next time more clearly, more efficiently, more truthfully. So, next segment is regarding Trump versus Norma Anderson, Trump versus Federalism, I like to call it, where right now the Supreme Court is listening an argument if Donald Trump is fit to run for office, as filed by the respondents. They filed it under the 14th Amendment, Section 3, that they're trying to bar Trump from running for office. My main concern is that they shouldn't have involved the 14th Amendment. They should have just involved Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, where elections and electoral standards and procedures are left to the sovereign states themselves. And again, if Colorado wants to ban anybody, they have all the right to do it. The same thing if Texas wants to ban Biden on some whatever issue. I mean, it's not like Biden will ever win those electoral votes, Texas votes, or Colorado will win Trump those electoral votes. So what does it matter? So my main issue is that these lawyers always focus on the wrong challenge. They're challenging on the wrong on the wrong article and the wrong amendment. They did it with Roe versus Wade. They did it with Lawrence versus Texas, Bowers versus Hardwick, and all the other ones. They're focusing on the wrong amendment, on the wrong article, and I just pray that the Supreme Court does not give this win to Trump, because then that will open up a floodgate of national control. And you know how the Supreme Court likes to keep that national control sometimes. So, and really, if they do this, then what happens to Article 2? I mean, does Article 2 get repealed by the courts and not by Congress? It's going to be very sad if they disavow Article 2.
Yeah, and I think, it's playing out a lot in the same ways as our discussion on impeachment. A lot of it's political theater. It's, Democrats playing political theater in Colorado. It's Republicans playing political theater in Texas. But the question is, do they have the right to do it? Yeah, they have the right to do it and kick them off the ballot. As far as I'm concerned, it's one of these strange things. On the one hand, I don't think Trump or Biden should be on the ballot anywhere. But on the other hand, do I want to kick either of them off the ballot? Probably not, because I think it increases the specter of civil war, because people are so wedded to the idea that the president is so important. And I really do worry about, the violence that we'll be seeing in this country as these political games keep being played. It's the question is who runs elections, and as we've said, it should be up to the states. It's kind of like the kind of the silver bullet that a lot of Republicans believe will protect elections is voter ID, and I personally, I don't have a problem with states instituting their own voter ID laws. I think they have the right to have voter ID laws. But I worry about it because I keep hearing it from a national conversation, and Republicans seem to want to have a national voter ID law. Well, I would be opposed to that, because that'll lead to national ID. I'm opposed to any form of national ID. We should not have an ID from the federal government. But it's up to the states. And one of the things that I heard was if the Supreme Court does allow Colorado to kick Trump off the ballot, the Colorado Republican Party has said that they would, instead of doing a primary, they would do a caucus. And they would still be allowed to pick Trump through a caucus process. Well, there you go. We don't have to really worry about this. How about the parties actually do their own independent caucus and, their own independent thing, instead of making the taxpayers fund these primary processes? So, it's just... But like I said, it's hard for me to really care much if Trump's on the ballot. I mean, Trump locked us down, called us non-essential. I think he's forfeited his right to run for president ever again. He should have. For people who call themselves conservatives should never even give Trump a second chance, and yet here he is, likely the Republican nominee again, which really sickens me. But it's all political theater, and we should recognize the right of the states to run their elections the way they see fit. You don't have to agree with their decision, but it's their right, and but we have to get away from this thinking that the president is such an important person, and we need to get away from the tribalism to start recognizing the Constitution again.
Yeah, no, good points you made. One thing that really kills me is that this whole issue as the right to vote, and, you heard this debacle in the 2000 elections, that when Florida was not counting certain ballots due to the Florida standard, the certain counties with the Florida standards to the butterfly ballot. And then the Al Gore team came here saying that we got to count all the votes. But then in 2020, you had the Trump team saying that you have to dismiss all the votes, and then requesting both sides. Well, the Republicans were the one requesting the Supreme Court to hear this case. The Republicans are just as crooked as the Democrats. But yet again, the courts did not really side with any candidate. They just said that they have to stop the recount in Florida because, different counties were setting different standards apart from the Florida standard. Some were counting dimple chads, others were counting dimple chads or hanging chads and chad and stuff like that. While in 2020, Trump was saying that they have to disregard all the votes in Pennsylvania because mail-in ballots are unconstitutional. Well, he's the one that signed the executive order during the whole pandemic that states can create their mail-in ballots. I mean, he gave that power to the states, and now he's crying about it. It's really demented that the American people, half of the American people, are still supporting a man like Donald Trump. I remember back in 1980, I've heard the stories that they were asking Gerald Ford to run for president again. And I'm saying to myself, really? You're asking Gerald Ford to stand in 1980 after he lost in 1976? And then, of course, came Reagan. I'm not happy about Reagan, but here comes a new idea, a little bit old, but a new idea, an outsider from D.C., and that's what we need. I mean, I'm not saying Nikki Haley will be a great choice, but somebody that's not a relic like Donald Trump or Joe Biden. So to see him jump again the race and the people, just half of the people jump on for that is just really sad and it's just confusing. But, my main argument is that they're taking away that power of federalism that was granted, that was granted to the states by the federal Constitution. They shouldn't even Norma Anderson, a very liberal Republican, should know that. But yet again, there you have the ignorance of many people not knowing this. So they're focusing on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, just as they did the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment when they were disputing Roe versus Wade. They should have been challenging on the 9th Amendment, not the 14th. They should be challenging on Article 2, not the 14th. But people, yet again, lack intelligence, they have an abundance for ignorance, and that's what's frightening in this country, that we have seen an abundance of ignorance, that they are not really understanding the concept of the Constitution or the true meaning of this republic. So that's what really is very frightening to see, and that's all. I just pray that they just will dismiss this case and not give a vote, and just dismiss it. Because it's really a clear of ignorance and not intelligence when I read the oral arguments on the Trump side, but even on the respondent side, it's just pure ignorance and lacks intelligence and common sense.
Yeah, and again, this is also built on this notion that this is a threat to democracy, and time and time again I have to remind people we're supposed to be a constitutional republic, not a democracy. But it's a threat to democracy that the Democrats want to take Trump off the ballot, or it's Donald Trump himself is a threat to democracy. And it's kind of interesting because I've heard rumors that the RNC wants to just basically give Donald Trump the nomination right now without any more primary votes, even though there's plenty of time left. I mean, I don't think Nikki Haley could win enough, but and nor do I want Nikki Haley. I mean, she's batshit crazy, but to make this argument that taking Trump off the ballot is a threat to democracy, and then you guys want to, on your own, take Nikki Haley off the ballot. Well, what is that? I mean, so it creates all this hypocrisy. It creates more tribalism. It creates more lunacy, and it's just further reason that I don't care anymore about the federal elections. I think it's just hopelessly corrupt in Washington, D.C., and the focus needs to be locally. And, I don't want to engage in this nonsense, this circus, this theater. And so, just hopefully we get through this whole election charade unscathed, and we can live to see another election cycle with more circus and more theater.
Yeah, and what really kills me the most is, many people from the left and the right are calling this a threat to democracy, and that really just infuriates me with the abundance of ignorance. And then I see Nigel Farage, which I cannot stand, and comes in defense of Trump and brings down our constitutional republic, where in the John Adams series there's a beautiful quote saying, "Didn't we fight a bloody and costly revolution to rid ourselves of British contagion?" Why are people I don't care what they do in England. I could give two craps what they do in France or wherever, or Hungary with, Mr. Dictator Viktor Orban. I really don't care. We're not a democracy. We're not a popular vote of idealist of a democracy. We're a republic. We are handed down by a representative republic, and this Constitution is a representative republic. We are gathered here not to give the people, we want the people to have their freedoms and their liberties, of course, but but yet again, we don't want to give too much liberty to the people, because then the people will take it upon themselves to do these crazy things that they're doing right now. And I just find it very difficult to see this. So I just hope that, we just get back to normal and the Supreme Court doesn't rule in favor of this. And people, for the love of God, Norma Anderson, if you're listening to this, read your Constitution more clearly. Ted Harvey from Colorado, read your Constitution more clearly. And, stop praising this demagogue of Donald Trump or this demagogue of Biden or whoever, and just read and praise the Constitution itself, and understand what you're doing that will affect our lives, because this court ruling will really affect our lives if it goes the wrong way. Not in the wrong way that they give it to Trump, in the wrong way that they will give it to Trump, and they're going to give it in the hands of a central government. And so I hope people will understand that we don't want central government here. We don't want a central government, central governance here. We want individual state governments abiding the Constitution itself.
Yeah, and obviously on that front, we got a lot of work to do to get back to the decentralized government. We basically already have a central government, and this is just going to further entrench it if the ruling goes the wrong way. But that's why the focus needs to be on local elections and getting people who are willing to stand up to the federal government when they make decrees from on high and say, well, no, actually, we get to make decisions here locally on, how our local government works. And but it's just it's just a mindset of the people. It needs to change. That people need to desire liberty and independence over tribalism and party politics. And it's an uphill battle to get people to snap out of this, but I see that as the only way to get back to the constitutional republic. It's really a matter of waking up the people to the games that are being played by both parties. And I see this time and time again that I can convince conservatives that the Democrats are playing political games, but they look away when you try to point out the Republicans' political games, and vice versa. You can convince Democrats of Republicans' political games, but they'll never recognize the political games that their party's playing. That's the battle, is trying to convince people that both of these parties are just hopelessly corrupt, and we need to stand up for our own rights and our own liberty, and stop looking for political saviors.
Yeah, no, you're right there, and I know we've talked about tribalism, and sadly, we've seen a lot of tribalism here in this country, and you're right, we try to convince conservatives that Democrats play these games, but yet they look away when Trump does the same thing or similar people. I was watching a documentary on Jack Abramoff, and I'm like, I think even him and say, well, Democrats do it. And I go, yeah, so? Just because they break the law, you have to break the law? No, you don't. So, you broke the law, you got caught, you're going to jail. Don't break the law, don't do anything to harm yourself and then, ruin it for the rest of us. So, it's still very sad where we are here. Even the respondents for this lawsuit, they're not seeing the clear picture that's really a fact. So as I read more of the oral arguments, I hope that there's no decision on this. I hope the courts will not decide on this. But I just cannot understand why they read something and they just pull it out of thin air and says, Trump's banned, he can't run for office because of some insurrection charge. Well, whether Trump was involved in whatever happened in January 6th. He wasn't there personally. He told his supporters to go to Capitol Hill and stop the votes from being certified. And is that an insurrectionist charge? I don't know. Now, I know it's an excuse to get him to get him off the ballot, but states don't need an excuse. And I've pointed out from history, South Carolina had every right to remove Lincoln from the ballots to protect their citizens from their ballots. The same thing if Pennsylvania wants to remove John Breckinridge from their ballot. It's not like those electoral votes are going to go for Breckinridge or Lincoln. So what difference does it matter? It's each individual state. That's the beauty of this republic. They are maintaining the glory of Article 2 to maintain something. It could be for political gains, but at least they're doing it constitutionally. And, that's what we're doing here. If Colorado wants to remove Trump from the ballot, you could say it's a political game, but it's a constitutional game. They're doing it constitutionally. I have no problem with that. Now, if they want to get rid of him for something, a trumped-up charge, well, whatever. It's their right. Bottom line is states can do whatever they want because Article 2 grants them that right. I want people to understand that. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 guarantees the states actions to regulate and enforce their own procedures and standards to protect the integrity of their voters. I mean, that's the genius of the founders, and we should keep it that way. Yes, I know many people said, well, the Articles of Confederation gives it more of a fact. The Articles of Confederation doesn't exist anymore. It's an old constitution. It's been removed from existence. But the new constitution gives us that same principles. We need to maintain that same principles. We need to give that states that granted right and not remove it. So I hope people really understand that. You know, the 14th Amendment, it's a very nice amendment because it gives protections to all citizens and all that, but it's been taken way too illogical out of it on abortion, on marriage, on whatever. So they need to really know what they're doing and how they're reading it because it's affecting all of us.
Yeah. We just need to actually talk about the Constitution, not just read it, but have real thorough discussions about what was the intent of the founders with the original Constitution, what's the intent of the people who wrote the 14th Amendment. You know, we live in a time where everybody's trying to read in their own ideas about what it should mean when we should actually go back and look at what the original intent was and not just play our own games with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Seth. I mean, you know, the intent is quite clear. I can see it. I know you can see it. I know Cody sees it. So that's three. Yeah, does the rest of American people and our followers, do they see it? Do they see that intent that, it was given to the states to control that? It's not given to a national government. You did point out a national voter ID. I oppose national voter IDs because I don't want the federal government dictating what ID I need to do. So I oppose a national voter ID. Now, if California doesn't want to have a voter ID, okay, fine. If Idaho wants one, okay, clap on. But that's the beauty of this republic, is that it's giving its independence and sovereignty for the states and for its people of those states as a nation, as a whole, to respect. Because my next door neighbor may not share my same views. Florida does not share the same views to Georgia or New York. But we are binded together by the Constitution. That's the intent. So I do hope, in my last conclusion, I do hope that the courts does not set this precedent, because and the Trump legal team are trying to build a case, and I've said this in a certain post, on a lower court decision and under the Enforcement Act of 1870. The Enforcement Act of 1870 was done to protect the 15th Amendment, not the 14th Amendment. So see, people don't even know people are not reading it correctly. This is all political games and a farce. So, when I read the oral arguments that, the Trump team saying, well, the Griffin case was to, they enforce under the Enforcement Act of 1870. I go, wait a minute. And I looked at it and I go, the 18th, that was to protect the 15th Amendment, which is totally different than the 14th Amendment. So see, Seth, they don't know. They're more ignorant than anybody else. And it just boggles the mind and it infuriates me. So, people, read your Constitution, read Article 2, and give it to the states to control it, not the federal government. We don't want that. We don't want the federal government, out of certain parts of the Constitution for enforcement.
Yeah, and when it comes to president, I think we'd be better off if we went back to the Electoral College deciding who the president is, and that the American people don't even vote on on the president, because it's really the big problem is that we put so much emphasis on the president, and Meanwhile, the Congress abdicates its duties. The Congress does nothing but play political games and do political theater. And so hopefully the Supreme Court doesn't completely botch this. I don't really have much faith in the Supreme Court on anything, so we'll see what happens. But stop. I just encourage people, stop putting so much emphasis on the president and start looking to what you can do locally in your own life and with local elections. What you can do to preserve your own liberty and stop putting so much power and weight into who the president is. This is a big part of the problem we have in this country, is that we live vicariously through the president when the power really is supposed to be primarily in the people's hands. I mean, the government's supposed to have very little power and authority, but we keep giving it more power when we act like the president is the be-all and end-all.
Yeah, that is, we don't want to give too much power to the federal government. Again, we don't want to give too much power to the states because, again, as I said recently, we can discuss it more in our next segment. The Ninth Amendment comes before the 10th Amendment, and the individual liberty comes first, then the state liberty comes second. So, but yet again, I just hope that, people read and understand that, this thing, what they're trying to do in Colorado, they did in South Carolina. They've done it. It's quite normal. I see no problem with it. And I hope that, I dislike Trump as much as possible, but I also think that if Texas wants to keep Trump and remove Biden, okay, fine. It's not like Biden's going to win that electoral vote, so who cares? It's your choice, your decision, and there should be no federal government influence. So, you're right. I have no faith in the Supreme Court. I hope the Supreme Court will do something right. I hope so. We'll see. And we'll be, on that note, we'll be back next Sunday. We're discussing another topic, and hopefully Cody will join us next Sunday. And with that, may I say, have yourself a great night and good week ahead.
Good night.